Coaching as Benevolence, a podcast for people who are curious about using coaching for self-development. I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings Grief and Loss Coaching.
And I'm L'Shawn with Michelle Sage Place Positive Intelligence Coaching. Today, we are going to look at hurt and hope. We're looking at holding both ends of the spectrum, hope and hurt. When I drive in my car and I'm listening to Sirius XM, I hear this song by Jelly Roll called I'm Not Okay. And it is such a beautiful song. When I hear it, it just really speaks to acknowledging when we are struggling, when we are hurt, and holding the idea that there is hope, that things are going to get better, that we're going to get through this. I just want to share a couple of the lyrics from the chorus. I'm not okay, but it's all going to be all right. It's not okay, but we're all going to be all right. It's such a beautiful message. It does such a good job of being raw and authentic in the pain that the speaker of the song is going through. And I think it's so easy to relate to the song as well. It's a beautiful song. And we are going to be focusing on those two ends of the spectrum, hurt and hope. And sometimes when we're in the thick of it, when we are dealing with the pain and the confusion, the anger that comes with upset in life, we don't see hope. And the thing that I love about this song is that even though this speaker is struggling almost all the way through the song, there's this sense that it's all going to be all right. So Eryn, what comes up for you as I'm talking about the song and also the both ends of the spectrum, hope and hurt?
Oh, I like how you spoke the chorus. It sounds even more poetic sometimes to say the words rather than sing. And then sometimes it sounds more poetic to sing rather than to say them. So I think that came up for me just in the structure of thinking about music and how sometimes when we can take the words and speak them from these popular songs and other songs, they can have a different effect on us or a different type of effect at the same time, right? The music creates maybe more latitude emotionally in different ways because of the beauty of the musicianship as well. So that came up, just that juxtaposition of hearing the words rather than hearing them sung. And then the other thing that came up for me was, in the chorus, he says, I'm not okay. And then, it's not okay. And I really like that he includes both of those to recognize that, yes, there may be something that someone is struggling with or going through a very difficult time. And it's not only on that individual, right? Like there's external circumstances, there are external things that are happening or have happened, things that are going outside beyond the self that also say, it's not okay, right? When we look at different societal structures as well that may be harmful to certain individuals and things like that. So I appreciate how much can be said in so few little words in that chorus that you spoke aloud. I was thinking, when have I noticed in my own life that I'm not okay and that it will be okay? And I can say that sometimes in those darkest, most depressing moments, it's really hard to see that it's going to be okay. So it just feels like it's not okay. The situation's not okay. Nothing is okay. And so finding that way to have that little kind of breadcrumb of hope in those darkest moments, I think can be helpful. I think it's a really complex thing when we're talking about clinical depression or different things like that, but also it's accessible for people. Hope is there. We can go into that a little bit more, but what are your thoughts, L'Shawn, on this chorus and hope and hurt?
As I said before, it's very relatable in terms of understanding that, hey, right now things are not good. And I also agree with you, I'm not okay and it's not okay. I think it does take into account circumstances around you that can cause you to not be okay. So it's layered, and it's not just, something that you're struggling with inner turmoil, but there could also be chaos and turmoil outside that you're viewing that could then cause you to feel like, wow, how are we going to recover from this? to go to it's not okay, like the situation. We've got several things going on in the world, and it does cause a person, an individual, like a person, when they're looking at the news, when they're looking at things that are going on with war and conflict, when they see people suffering, there's this feeling of hopelessness. Where am I, this one individual? How am I going to add to the solution to this problem? It's so overwhelming. It's so big. How am I going to add to this? Or what can I do? I don't know where to begin. And it's easy to then decide, well, I can't do anything, so I'm just going to turn a blind eye, or I'm going to, blame like a higher power or something like that. So there's so many avenues one can take. And I'm not saying one is good or bad. I'm just saying that there's so many avenues that we can take, so many perspectives that we can hold when looking at a situation that can be overwhelming and also can be upsetting as well. So that's the one thing that I also took into account. You also mentioned depression, things that clinically, physiologically, that we struggle with. And there's this balance, I think, between understanding that things are not the best or what we would like them to be, but we can hold in that space that hope. So that's that ambiguity. If outside or inside things are not good, I can still hold on to the idea that things are going to be okay.
I like how you framed that with thinking about perspectives and how we can hold multiple perspectives that with very juxtapositioning within them, or that have quite a bit of difference between them. And so I can hold on to hope while also holding on to fear, right? Or there's a way to kind of say it doesn't have to be all one thing or all the other. So I think one thing that I've really appreciated about coaching is this idea that, we can have perspective shifts and we can make, small shifts in the way that we think and view the world that doesn't negate, our critique and our critical thought, but also holds that space for the paradox of humanness, the hopefulness, the we're all swimming in a shattered world in a way, right? A very kind of challenging world. And there's still hope that's accessible there. And for me, that comes from music, it comes from movement, it comes from conversations, it comes from being part of a community. Those types of things help ground me in hope. And I think that's a good question for people to consider, what creates hope for them. And I just gave some examples of things that create hope for me without also, pushing down hard feelings, still being able to hold those as well. And I will say it was incredibly hard for me to really grapple with hope when my daughter died in 2014. I think I don't know if there was hope there ever, but at the time I hit the worst part of the depression after her loss. And so I'm like, well, what brought me hope in that situation? What, really helped me? And obviously getting the, clinical support that I needed was important. But part of this was like the surrendering, like, when you keep hit bottom again and they just kind of open you all the way down, you're like, okay, now I can pick myself back up. Now there's a place that I've landed. I kick my feet at the bottom and kind of swim to the surface. That's the imagery that I get from that moment when I felt like there was no hope there. But there was something that allowed me to let go and that helped me, move up and swim up to the surface. And I think part of it is a spiritual thing. And it's a mystery too, right? Sometimes it's really hard to identify how hope can really help us when we're in the moment of it, and even looking back. So, L'Shawn, do you have moments where you've created hope in your life and what that looks like, and maybe some challenges you've had with hope?
I like how you mentioned the word surrender, because that's usually when I am suffering the most and I'm struggling to find an answer or to fix the situation or myself. It isn't until I'm able to just say, hey, you know what? I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have the strength right now, the strength of heart. I don't have the wherewithal to do this. So I am just going to let go of the need to control the outcomes. I'm going to let go of this. And I'm just going to say, hey, higher power, God, please, I'm going to leave this in your hands. You know more than I do. You see more than I do. You have a broader perspective than I do. And I'm going to leave it up to you. One of the things that I'm learning now is to let go and to have that faith. And that also features in the song as well. That need when you are unable to see the end, you're unable to see how this is going to play out, how you're going to get through this. Just letting go and being like, I'm going to be all right. This is going to be okay. I believe in a benevolent higher power who's going to see me through this, who sees more than I do. And that's where faith comes in as well. So that's what's come up for me in what you were saying about surrender. And then the mystery of it too. You can be in so much pain. And then there's the question, the desire to feel better, to get out of the suffering, because no one can really take that much suffering, you know? And there is that desire to get out of it, to feel better. And that brings me to another question. The speaker in this song is speaking about himself. I'm just to say it's a man because it's a man singing, but an identifying man singing. So I imagine that this person, this individual in this song is singing for themselves, and they are also including humanity. There is a part of the song that says, I know I can't be the only one who's suffering. I'm paraphrasing. But then, so of course, as a coach, as someone who wants to show care, does it work the other way around? And in my experience, if someone were to say to me, hey, I know you're suffering, but you're going to be okay, that would work for me because they're acknowledging that I'm suffering. They're not brushing it aside. They're not sugarcoating it. There's no toxic positivity there. They're acknowledging, I see your suffering, and this is real, and this is happening to you, and it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. For me, that's comforting, but that may not be comforting for everyone, right? There might be a sense that you're still brushing aside, because I know that I have people in my life that when I do say those things, it makes them angrier. It makes them like even more upset. Oh, but but this is happening now. And they kind of double down into it, like they have to justify it's not going to be all right. Like they'll say in their pain, it's not going to be all right. So my question is to you, Eryn, what are your thoughts about the other way around? Do you think it would work if a person outside of the suffering who wants to show care, do you think that this is something that you could say that could show care?
I think generally in a lot of ways, yes. And you can play around with the language to match your client's needs and your person's needs that you know quite well. Maybe they're a new client, so that's a little bit of a different situation. But with a current client, maybe it's not that they're hanging on to suffering. Maybe they're hurting in a different way potentially. So maybe it's being very specific. We talked about that specificity of language in previous episodes, but I know you're hurting in X way. I think we can create a path forward. I believe there is hope here. I find that hopeful language very encouraging. I think that for me, I don't know if I ever heard that once from anybody in that grief experience. I've had multiple grief experiences, but the one that, keeps coming to mind is the most significant one in my own personal life. And I think at that time that would have been just to hear those words, that would have been that breadcrumb of hope that I needed in some ways to maybe feel a little bit more okay, suffer less, those sorts of things. So I find that statement is likely very powerful. And I'm trying to think of a situation that I've come across in my professional practice where someone would not approve of that statement or would find, just a simple sentence around hope not the most helpful. And I can't really think of one because it is, like you said, it's not toxic positivity when we're framing it in hope. It's health and a path, and there's wisdom and a bigger knowledge that we'll get through this together. And Carrie Newcomer sings about this in one of her songs. And I think I put this in my book too. But together we'll see this through is one of her lines in one and I paraphrase a little bit in one of her songs. And I remember when I first heard that song thinking, wow, that can be really powerful to hear as an individual. And it would have been really powerful to hear 10 years ago. So I think there's a lot of power in that. And yet some people may prefer to hear a more individualistic view of that, given just their viewpoints on the world and those sorts of things. So as long as the language is thoughtful and finessed, I think it makes a lot of sense to include that in client meetings. And it doesn't have to be in these really high stake circumstances around certain, death losses or things like that. It can be around a lot of changes that people are grappling with, even within a job, right? Not even losing a job, but even within the job. So I think hopeful statements are a powerful tool to use in many instances. And that makes me think, did I hear hopeful statements at work? We did a lot of work with hope theory. We did a lot of work where we built students' self-belief in themselves and their self-efficacy. So we did that through that type of work. So I'm curious now, are there certain hope statements that might work well with people in even like the professional setting or other settings as well? So that's my response. Do you have anything to add there, L'Shawn?
I like how you mentioned bringing in hope in work, bringing in hope, not just in instances where one is suffering, but maybe, where there's some struggling going on, but it's not necessarily suffering. It could possibly be you have a plan and it's taking a little bit longer than you thought it was going to take. For example, if we take it to like coaching, you go into your coaching agreement, you have certain goals in mind, certain things you want to work on. And I'm sure, Eryn, you have this more in the grief and loss sector, where there is no timeline. You can't really put a date or a schedule on your grief. You can't really put a schedule on change either, because you're going to encounter things that you didn't anticipate, because at the time you were in a certain place in your life where you could see certain things. And as you grow into this other way of being that you are working with your coach on, you will then become more aware of things that you were not aware of when you started your journey. And then you've got to go with your coach and say, hey, we're here now and I'm noticing this. I thought we were working on this, but we're working on this. And it's easy when you get a shift in your focus to get discouraged. And where we as coaches can bring hope in, we can let the client know, hey, you've come so far. Let's look and see all of the things that you've done and the awarenesses that you have gained in this journey. Yes, you started out with this, and then you find now that you're halfway there, or you're at a point now in our coaching where you're seeing something different. Your priorities have changed and you've shifted. What does that mean? And how can we celebrate that? And I think when we can point to our client's progress and we can say, hey, you've come so far. My experience is when I'm in it, when I'm growing and I start a journey, I'm looking at all of the things that I have yet to accomplish, and I forget what I have accomplished. And it helps me and it gives me hope when I'm looking at my road ahead and it's shifted or it seems a lot longer than I thought. It helps to hear from a coach or a friend, my goodness, you've come so far. And to me, acknowledging past wins and accomplishments does give hope and encouragement, And that's where my mind is going when I'm thinking about adding hope in like a coaching relationship, but that can be in a personal relationship as well, where we give ourselves time and space to acknowledge how far we've come. And we also acknowledge, hey, if I've come this far, and I have in my past been in situations where I thought that I would never get through it, or I thought that I would throw in the towel, but here I am. So that could mean that right now, as I'm, facing the next step, that I'm going to get through that too. So there's that. And those are some things that I was thinking about as you were talking, Eryn, and also when I'm thinking about hope and ways that we can bring that into a situation where we can maybe add balance because we're looking at hurt and hope.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it would be therapeutic or healing for us to add add that hope where we see hurt. But we'd have to do it in a very, I would say we need to be present and self-aware, aware of the other person, aware of the other person's needs, where the person is in the process. If they're deep in their pain, probably best just to be there and not mention hope. When we feel like the person is maybe open to the idea, it might be nice to just kind of let a little bit of light in, but also hold space for the times when darkness prevails, knowing that there will be light and that the person who's suffering, or even when we're suffering, understanding that, yeah, at this moment, I don't see the light, but I know it's there.
And I think there's an art to that hope for those who are in a deep space or in the darkness. And I'm just speaking of this a little bit from my personal experience and how helpful that might have been for me, but also in professional experience when we think about grief and loss. One kind of thing to think about with hope is that there is some research that we know, like, by the time you've reached full maturity, 80 plus years old or whatever, you have likely dealt with multiple grief and loss instances in your life. And so you have become accustomed to how that feels and how to respond. Now, that might be hopeful in some ways to those of us starting out earlier in our grief and loss journeys and feeling like completely lost. And we've talked about in the past how our brain's creating that new map. I will say though, by doing that work around your grief and loss, you're going to be responding to it in healthy and thoughtful ways in the future, rather than maybe somebody who's been dealing with the exact same way many, many, many years and isn't really maybe finding new perspective shifts or new joys or, things like that. So I see that. And then the other thing that I think about from what you said, when we can offer hope, I think we can offer hope through education, just even that example of, what we know about grief and loss and, how people adjust to it, but also what is the education about what their mind is going through, maybe with their emotions and their body, and then what's going on externally. I think sometimes giving information that's not overwhelming, but also very scaffolded is a way to provide hope. It helps people create that new map of their world because now they have a few more tools for that. And I think that gives some hope as well. I think of like, okay, so we provide hope as coaches by the way that we hold space for our clients, by our conversations and the way that we listen to them. And then also through a little bit of education, educational materials that we provide. And then through all of that, we provide some pathways through various activities that are responsive to the individual's needs. And so I think that's what's so cool about coaching is it is a hopeful practice in itself because it is a little bit more solution focused. It is a little bit more of kind of a pathway focused. Obviously, it's going to be responsive. There's no one path when we think about moving through any hardship or anything that's challenging, but it does hold space for both of those ends. So not just the hurt and hope ends, but also there is a path and there is a way to also feel your hurt and live in your hurt and those sorts of things too.
No, I liked what you said about education. That's empowering. And I also like what you said about the fact that you can give the person who's suffering, especially with grief and loss, but there are other avenues, there are also areas in coaching where the coach can educate their client about change, what that looks like, what we know about change, and also learning, because that is essentially what our client is doing in the coaching relationship. There is learning there, and learning, right, results in change because your knowledge is changing. I really like the piece about how we can shed light on what someone is going through. Part of suffering is confusion or inability to understand what's happening with you. And if you're an intellectual person, or if you're a curious person, or if you're someone who makes sense of the world through knowledge and information, that I think would be really helpful for getting through something. So I'm that kind of person. If I can understand something, then I can feel better about it. If I can understand, oh, the reason why I'm having a difficult time focusing is because this is what happens to the brain when you're grieving. I understand that this is something that is part of grieving, and it's not one more thing I have to worry about in terms of something that's and understanding how to navigate that. I think the education helps the person navigate with clarity. And I think it also, as I was saying before, education is empowering. So I like that education piece to showing care and also helping a person who is suffering or helping a person who's going through a hard time.
And I've heard of and experienced, and then have talked with other people who've experienced that dark night of the soul experience, where it is almost it's really hard to find what piece of education might help create movement with that. But I think that is kind of the key in that experience too, is finding the right type of information. Like you were talking about how you make sense of the world and wanting to understand. And some of the information for another person might be poetry or who knows, I don't know. That's just an example there. So I think that that's important, and I think that speaks to the significance of coaching and therapy and those types of things, is you do have a thought partner, a feeling partner that you can sit there with and hold space together to help come up with some of these tools and strategies that might work, and also recognize that there is time, it's going to take time and those sorts of things too. And then the other thing I was thinking about was this hurt piece, because I think I've spoken a little bit more to the hope piece, but the hurt piece is, I feel like when people are in despair, it sometimes is I'm the only one. That's what I like about the chorus that you spoke to, but we're all going to be all right. And I know I can't be the only one. So having that opportunity to really understand that, you're not alone in your pain and suffering. And one kind of scaffolding that I really like is what Megan Devine talks about, kind of being more in the pain and shifting out of the suffering into pain. And there are certain things that cause us suffering. Some of those are external, that are horrible and we do not have control over. And it makes a lot of sense. But if we can maybe sometimes sit in pain rather than suffering, there is a little bit more of that hope with that hurt too.
Yeah, I love how you differentiated between suffering and pain. For me, when I think of suffering, I think this is prolonged pain. And I think that we add to that by our interpretation. And also, if we were to spiral and to think that, this will never end, we start telling that story around pain, which I then think transforms pain to suffering. There is some opportunities for empowerment in that. And again, you've got to be really careful when you mention this, and you have to make sure the person is in a space where they can hear it and where it will land in a way that doesn't sound like you're blaming the person, but in a way that you're giving them the power to shift. Again, it would be really important to choose your words wisely when you do mention that a lot of our suffering does come from how we are interpreting. There's pain. Pain is there. It's inevitable. It is, in a way, when I think about the chorus to this song, I'm not okay. So that's the pain. That's just the reality of the situation. But I'm going to be all right. That is taking control of how we're going to interpret this. I'm not okay. I'm going to interpret this as temporary. I'm going to interpret this as something to overcome, something to get through. And then that can lessen the suffering. That doesn't mean that, and it can maybe even make the suffering go away. So like you were saying, be in pain instead of in suffering, or maybe leaning more into the pain rather than the suffering. In positive intelligence coaching, we have a exercise that we do where we shift from the suffering to the pain. And one of the ways that we interpret suffering is that it's mental, that we are causing this uncomfortable or painful situation to be more in our mind, and it makes it meaningful. And one thing that we do is we shift into, if it's physical pain, we shift into where that is in our body so that we're more present. And that's one way that we shift from suffering to pain. A lighter example, it's been very hot. I think we've reached record temperatures of heat. And if you do not like heat, and you might think, oh my gosh, when is this going to end? This is terrible. I hate the feeling of sweat on my skin. This is terrible. And instead shift into what's going on with your body, the feel of the heat on your skin. And that way you're shifting your perspective from one of in the mind to one of the physical. And when we do that, that helps ground us more and putting us in the present. So that's just one thing that I thought about when you were mentioning being in pain, or focusing on the pain rather than the suffering. I might be paraphrasing wrong. If so, please correct me.
No, it's good. And I love that you're bringing it outside of our mind too, which is so important, because that's pain does not just exist there. And I think that when we get into those moments, we think it's all just in our minds, and it's so much more than that.
Absolutely. And then also physical, emotional pain and your physical sensations can also be related as well. So for example, let's say you're nervous, that is a emotional state. However, you might feel that in your body, in your stomach, maybe butterflies in your stomach. You might feel tension. So another way that we look at emotional pain, emotional discomfort, that kind of thing, is we look at where is it physically manifesting in our body. That helps with me. I'm going to speak personally. When I do that, it allows me to become more present, and it lessens the intensity of it. So if I'm nervous or if I'm angry or tense, I focus on the tension in my shoulders. And then that allows me to deal with the physical part of it. So I can take a deep breath, or I can loosen my shoulders. And somehow when I do that, when I deal with the physical, it helps with the emotional as well. So that's another way that we can kind of reverse engineer it. Rather than try and figure out what it is that maybe we know what's making us nervous and we can't really stop that from happening, but we can focus on our body, and that changes our focus and could also help give us a calm feeling, or even just it shifts our focus so that we might think differently or change the experience, because we're focusing on something other than maybe the mental aspect of it, and we're looking at our body, and it might help to kind of shift your perspective. Eryn, any thoughts?
I mean, I think that's a good segue into our coaching nugget of wisdom, which is one in itself. Did you want to add another one, or do you want me to go? Or
coaching nugget of wisdom. I would say I would really encourage one bit of wisdom I would say is examine in your life where hurt and hope show up, and play with some ideas like Eryn and I have done on this episode, where hurt and hope mirror each other, or how they can balance each other out. That's what I would encourage our listeners.
Yeah, I have a similar one. So this might be too similar, but just, when you think of hurt in your past, how did you feel that? What did you think about that? And what helped you in those situations? So maybe being able to take those nuggets of hope of what have helped you into new places into your life, keeping in mind that those might change as well as you change, but they are some, ideas or a framework or some grounding tools to start from, to then build from there.
Thanks for joining us. for Coaching as Benevolence. I'm L'Shawn with Mayshell's Sage Place, Positive Intelligence Coaching.
And I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings, Grief and Loss Coaching.
Have a benevolent day.